So our children are going to lead that charge into the next industrial revolution and the one beyond that. And the kind of trick is to make sure that our own survival as a species and our survival as a planet is the mission of that revolution and the mission of our economic strategy going forward. So really great to hear from you all, and keen to learn from today's session and to hear from people how we might advance that agenda.
Well, Claire, thanks for it. Absolutely brilliant. I love the way you link up the industrial revolution with the future and that same sort of sense of, symbiotic energy and the young ones. Absolutely brilliant. Now, thank you very much. And now who's next? Is it going to be Beth or Claire?
Yeah, I'm happy to go next, Paul. No problem at all.
Love it.
Thank you for pulling this event together and allowing us to kind of have a voice and to listen and support. And I think I very much agree with what Big Tom was saying, that we've got to move from climate alone to climate and nature together. The nature crisis, I think, sometimes feels like the poor cousin receiving less attention, and obviously that has to change. What I would say is the pandemic has highlighted inequalities across society, but also allowed many of us to kind of refocus and appreciate what's around us, and really kind of like accelerated the debate to move into net zero and climate change. We know, lots of people are going back to work, and we welcome that, but there are lots, big parts of the economy that have a long way to go. And I think, one of the most effective ways to deliver growth following any sort of major economic shock is to invest in good work. And for us, that means investment to create green jobs. But one of the things Claire was talking about before on Industrial Revolution, which is why I kind of wanted to come in straight after, is that we can't have an industrial revolution without an investment plan and a proper industrial strategy that maps out, every region's different. We all have our own strengths when it comes to moving to net zero and climate change, but we have to have a strong industrial strategy that kind of maps out how we're going to achieve that. And just to put things into context, the UK recovery plans, green recovery plans, remain a fraction of the cost in terms of other G7 countries. So despite the government sort of flagship 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution, we've just had the G7 summit. We know that the UK Treasury is investing something like £180 per person on green recovery and green jobs, while we've got the Biden administration over in the USA investing around 2,960 a person, Germany 596, Canada 866, and so on. So I think what is clear is that we need an ambitious plan to create jobs. And we did some research last year. I mean, I'll stop after this, Paul, because it could go on forever. But we did some research and found that with the investment of 85 billion in a programme for green jobs growth, we could create 1.24 million jobs in the next decade. And that's, these are opportunities for our young people. These are opportunities for existing staff and high carbon industries to move to decarbonised workplaces, but also new jobs in retrofitting housing, infrastructure around electric vehicle charging points, decarbonising kind of existing workplaces, research and development, broadband. So there's absolutely loads of opportunities here. And obviously what we're calling for, and this is the ask, I think, is a regional recovery task force or transition panels that brings together social partners. So, people from Job Centre Plus, employers, unions, government, civic partners, to pull together plans to move to net zero. And I'm a big fan of citizens' juries and deliberative democracy models to inform the implementation of devolved powers and plans, if you like. But they're just some sort of observations for me in terms of creating good, green, sustainable jobs for our future generations. Thanks, Paul.
Fantastic, absolutely brilliant. And I love it that you brought up the financial side of things, because we've all seen it. It was last year after the IPBES report was really made public. and the UN Decade of Restoration was announced earlier this year, when we saw the High Ambition Coalition, of which the UK is a part, and that is to protect 30% of the planet by 2030. That's the agreed minimum by scientists. Many countries have signed up for it. It's now a universal goal. Let's protect 30% by 2030. And then, of course, it was followed by all the financial reports, absolutely brilliant things that says no matter what it costs, it's in the billions, in the trillions, no matter what it costs to protect 30%, the financial rewards are 5 times that. So it's a pretty good business plan, right? So we're crazy to have this short-term thinking of holding back the money. Thanks again, Beth. And now we move on to Claire. Claire Penny-Evans, please.
Thanks, Paul. I think it's one of those poison chalices to go last out of 3 people who are speaking, because you listen to what's being said and you think, oh, well, I was going to say that actually as well, but I'll try and just sum up. I thought it was fantastic to hear from the children and young people. I think it's really important that we sort of somehow manage to get that message across more widely to people, because I think, like Beth said, people have got in touch more with nature and through the pandemic, but young people have got this great voice that they can push forward, and we really need to get that voice front and center. So I mean, we've been doing some climate summits in our area, and we've got one with school children in October, because we really think it's important that they get to use a bit of pester power as well with their parents, and get parents on board with what's being said and done, because there's, I think, just as we had the whole thing around smoking in the 80s and 90s, where people started giving up, we can get children to really get that going. I think one of the things was what can be one of the asks of how we can get this for the North as well. And I really think there's a real opportunity for the North to actually be leading the way on this, to be the leading area in the country, but not just the country, but in the world, on what we can do around green technology and low carbon technology. But I think what we need is devolution, and we need much more devolution, and we need much more fairer devolution. The children and young people talk there about walking to school or cycling to school and things like that. And well, what about public transport as well? We really lack on public transport. It's really expensive up here in Newcastle for me to go into the city centre. If I was going to take a family of 4 into the city centre, it costs me far more to do that than it does to go in with my car if I wanted to. So we need sort of devolution powers as well, that across the board, that enable us to make decisions that are best for our communities. And we also need that around what Beth said. We need that long-term vision as well from the government. We need the long-term vision of funding streams. We don't just need little small pots of money that we all compete against as well. We were incredibly lucky in Newcastle to get 30 million to decarbonise our public sector buildings, which is going to create jobs and help us to reach our net zero target. But we had to compete with the university. We were competing with other cities, and that sort of defeats the purpose in a way. We need to be looking at working together, because actually one of the things we know about this is the climate crisis is going to be bigger than the pandemic. It's going to have a huge impact around the world, and we all need to work together. And it's about coming together and listening to each other. And at the moment, it seems that cities are leading the way. Our city, and I know lots of local authorities around the country, have got net zero by 2030, government's 2050. We are leading the way. We're working with cities from across the world and learning what they're doing. So I think there's a lot the government can do to help with air quality. We're being asked to implement a clean air zone, which, but they haven't coughed up the money for that. We're talking about like public transport. We're looking at, we want to increase our green spaces, and make that something that's much more accessible for all of our communities, and increase our tree canopy cover so it's accessible for every area of our city, not just one area that might be greener than the other, and say, okay, you've got that canopy cover in that area, but what about the the rest of the city. So we've been working with our other 6 local authorities to put in a bid for trees to build a new community forest, you know, so we can look to hedgerows, trees, increase our biodiversity. But I think it's important for what children and people saying is to get their voice across and to link in to get that wider and put pressure on government. If they talk about levelling up, then they need to be levelling up with funding and devolution powers.
Wow, thank you, Claire. Absolutely love it. And I know that feeling you say about going last, because we've had 3 great talk guests. Thanks to this levelling up, devolution, regional leadership, which you're demonstrating right here. It couldn't be better. It's exciting business. And now we're going to hear, thanks to Johnny and the genius that he is behind the scenes, sort of half behind the scenes, we've now got contributions from Colm Bowell from Nature North, Emily Moore from Groundwork, and Jonathan Prasad, who's going to join us by video, from the People's Powerhouse Racial Justice Group. But Johnny, just a quick question. Do we introduce each one of them, or do they just follow each other? How do we do it?
I think we just go straight to Colm, if that's all right.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Over to you, Colm.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks very much, everyone. And thanks for the opportunity both to listen and to talk today. Yes, my name is Colm Bowe. I'm actually Development Manager at Nature North, and I'm actually seconded to that role from one of our northern universities, Liverpool John Moores University. Yeah, I'll be very excited to have those 3 young people come as students, be my students in a few years' time. The level of knowledge they showed was excellent, and the passion. So yeah, it'll be exciting to see their future going forward. So what is Nature North? So Nature North is a collaboration between environmental organisations. So that includes government agencies, NGOs, protected areas, and funds in the north of England. And what we're trying to do essentially is to drive climate resilience and green growth through nature recovery within the Northern Powerhouse area. It's kind of been addressed a little bit today, but we know that nature underpins our well-being and economy. And we've already highlighted that we're really lucky in the north in terms of how much nature we've got. It's actually one of our USPs, and actually having nature areas very close to where people are as well is quite unique across the country. But sadly, actually, much of that nature is actually in quite a degraded state, and that means we're not realising its true value. We also have figures like 500,000 people in the north of England are not within 10-minute walk of green spaces, and that's likely to be much more if you talk about quality green spaces. So there's clearly work to be done in terms of nature recovery, both in terms of restoration of our existing habitats and creation of new habitats across the north of England. And we know that nature recovery has the potential to be part of a just transition and the green economy and green growth within the north of England. So if we look at, for example, just woodland creation, whether we look at that through different ways, we can measure that through, for example, GVA, economic and social value, or the jobs that creates. We can see that within GVA, just producing 100 hectares of new woodland habitat will create £300,000 of GVA. It gives you a cost benefit analysis in terms of economic and social values. For every £1 invested, we'll get a £2.79 return. And in terms of green job creation, we know that creating 100 hectares will create 25 temporary jobs and 6 job years in terms of more permanent jobs. So what we're trying to do at Nature North is essentially to facilitate that nature recovery at scale across the north of England. And we're trying to do a number of things to make that happen. So what we want to do is to work with and advocate with policymakers, so the natural environment and the benefits it provides to climate resilience and green growth at the heart of northern policy. We want to bring together a network of public, private and third sector organisations to regularly work together on these large scale projects. And we want to support some of these large-scale projects like the Great North Bog and the Northern Forest that already exist and are doing amazing things at scale across the north of England, but also to develop new investable concepts at a regional scale for nature recovery and identify how we can draw funding into those through public funding, through private funding, through that kind of blended finance agenda that's being talked about. We want to set out a clear strategic plan for nature recovery in the north. And if we think that if we can achieve all of those things, we'll end up with a thriving environment across the north of England, where we've got measurable changes in improvement in environment and climate resilience and green growth, where we've got equitable access to the benefits of nature, and where nature is acknowledged by policymakers, the public and business as key to prosperity, well-being and resilience to our communities in the north. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much for that, Colm. And Emily, would you?
Hi, thank you.
Right.
So, hi everyone, my name's Emily Moyer and I'm currently working for Groundwork as part of the government's Kickstart scheme in development and research. And I thought I'd use my time speaking today to highlight what I see as a lack of equity in the use and access of green spaces, specifically for women and girls, and how I think green spaces in the north can be redesigned, maintained and promoted in order to accommodate for the safety and comfort of this demographic within these spaces, and also to allow them to see themselves reflected in the spaces. Because I feel like when you see yourself reflected in something, you become more engaged with it and therefore can become more engaged with wider issues, wider environmental issues such as climate change, etc. So when it comes to equality and access to and the use of green spaces, there is a significant amount of evidence to suggest that women and young girls, particularly those who identify as LGBTQ+, or BIPOC, or as disabled, or of a lower socioeconomic status, are made to feel unsafe or unwelcome within green spaces. So in my research on this topic, I found some significant yet not very surprising statistics regarding women and young girls' access to green spaces. These figures were taken from the Girl Guide's Girls' Attitude Survey for 2020, which state that over a quarter of girls and young women aged 7 to 10 feel unsafe when they go outside, increasing to 2/5 for those aged 11 to 16 and almost half aged 17 to 21. This can be related specifically to green space because 82% of the girls and young women surveyed thought that children and young people should have more of an involvement in designing playgrounds, parks and outdoor green facilities in their local area, with almost half stating that they would like to do this in order for girls and young women to feel safer outside, and that they felt more should be done regarding this issue. When acknowledging these statistics, it's plain to see the reality of young women and girls' experiences within green spaces, a reality which may limit their enjoyment and access to cultural and recreational activities and negatively affect their physical health and mental well-being. Factors in the infrastructure of green spaces that might add to these statistics include things like poorly lit areas, the feeling that green spaces don't have proper surveillance, and blind spots in certain pathways. And adding to this, I feel that many green spaces, particularly parks, recreational green spaces, have activities that cater mostly towards men and boys. And I don't want to generalise, but I personally believe that this could be down to public planning and designing of these green spaces being dominated largely by men. Facilities for young people in parks and green areas can often be seen in the form of skate parks, football pitches, BMX tracks and the like. And that's not to say that these activities are things that girls aren't interested in or can't be used by girls, and that all boys have to take an interest in these things, but more so that many girls and young women feel like they can't or shouldn't use them. In Make Space for Girls summary on their findings on gender and public spaces, they found that girls and young women often report that their use of space is regulated by the presence of boys. They don't use spaces when they know that boys will be present and avoid these areas at certain times of the day. As one academic in their study put it, they're seen as the wrong gender in the wrong space. And obviously the things that I've put forward to you so far, they don't just apply to girls as one homogenized identity. The inequality in green spaces in the north is extremely multifaceted. Women and girls of colour and people of colour in general, disabled people, those that identify as LGBTQ+, and those of any marginalised group can also benefit from changes being made in the design, structure and surveillance of green space. Moving forward, I think there are many important steps that can be taken in order to secure equality in the access to green spaces for women and girls, a change in the design of public spaces, including things like better lighting, safe toilet facilities, easily accessible entrances to go in and out of the area, etc. But I think the most important strategy is what we're doing today, simply engaging with young people, marginalised groups in the north, and asking them what they think should be done and what facilities they would like to see added to encourage them to make use of the space and therefore become more engaged with the natural world and environmental issues. As you can see from today, we do want to get involved, and from the statistics I talked about earlier, and I think it's time for marginalised voices to be heard. Thank you.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much, Emily. I really enjoyed that. These are some great inputs here. And then now we introduce Jonathan Prasad, who joined us by video from the People's Powerhouse Racial Justice Group. So thanks, Johnny.
I'm wondering, Paul, could we maybe get a couple of the audience in before we go to Jonathan? Would that be
Oh, yes, please. The more audience participation, the better, if you see what I mean. So, yeah, I can see the chat's really lively. So over to you.
All right. So loads of great comments in the chat. Thank you for all that. So we're going to try and get around to as many of you as possible. I've got Cara Halliwell. You made a great comment in the chat earlier. Would you like to come forward?
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Brilliant. I guess I'm really interested in listening and learning and just hearing what people are saying. In my situation, I'm an individual. I'm a business owner, a small business owner, and I'm somebody who delivers a consultancy services to clients. So none of that is a green role or a green job, but I must be able to do something. I must be able to have an influence for good. I'm interested. I want my awareness and my influence to grow and to be positive, but I just wonder how to begin. And so I was sort of nodding away and making notes, and fascinated to hear about the Regional Recovery Task Force suggestion. I think that was from Beth. And just to hear about all this great work, how does someone like me get involved? How can we have an input if we're not in a traditionally green sector, or particularly a job that's a green job? I must still be able to do something. So what would that look like?
Brilliant. Thank you, Cara. And I've also got Steve Handsome. You made a comment really early on. So do you want to come through?
Yeah. Yes. Thanks. My comment's basically just a pretty simple one, really. Is I think everybody, and I think the government's got a huge vested interest in this, is to get people back to the way it was. Get back to the pubs. Get back the way it was. Get back to going to Benidorm on your holidays, and everything's going to be fine and dandy. And we've still got people going to food banks. We've still got people going to clothing banks. We've still got 74,000 kids with long COVID. We've got 500,000 people with long COVID who's going to be having to claim universal credit, which we're trying to keep the uplift on. So I've got to plug that one, because that's money that's coming out of the economy, £20 a week for a lot of people that's coming out of the economy. But the point is basically that we're so keen to go back to this old way of doing things that we're missing a huge opportunity to move things like the 4-day week, to look at automation, to look at actually things like UBI, UBS, to radically change. And I tell all politicians with this at the moment, because Labour, and I'm a Labour Party member, are rolling back big style on an ambitious programme, of which would be a new Green Deal. So I think there's a massive, massive opportunity being missed here, and it needs leadership. Obviously, I think Jamie just has done a fantastic job at North of Tyne, but he hasn't really got the powers to make a massive difference that is needed. But I think, and my final point would be, just to continue, just to fight to finish, would be there's a lot of people, a lot of experience here. So if this regional recovery team, this task force wants to be put together, I think there's a hell of a lot of good people on this call here who can do it. And if the politicians won't do it, it's down to individuals to do it. So that's my little gripe, and I'm sorry if I'm getting a little bit heated up over it, but it's something I do feel passionately about. We're missing a huge, huge opportunity. It could be so much better. We don't have to go back to the old ways. Thank you very much.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Steve. And I think we'll take one more, if that's all right, Paul, and then we'll get responses and maybe bring Jonathan in later on video. So I've got loads of great comments. I'm going to go with Carol Evans.
Oh, right. Oh, I can't get my video. You cut my video.
Oh no, I don't think I have. How about we come back to you? We can come back.
Okay, it just won't won't start. Okay.
Or you can do it without video if you like, or we can come back later.
No, it's just the trains. I come from the Peak District. We have excellent. We have quite a good train service, but we do have trains whizzing through. Train companies don't like to stop, for one thing. They think it's more efficient to go from A to B than to worry about the stations in between. But in the Peak District, obviously, the stations are inaccessible. So people who want to work get jobs in Sheffield or Manchester have no opportunity if they have mobility problems. And it's about getting tourists in as well. people coming with some people say they come with their bikes, and then they have such a problem getting off the platform. They have all these steps to go up and down. And I think we really need to look very seriously about accessibility of stations, because it's making the trains, people unable to use the trains, and they need to use the trains. So I don't know whether any disabled people, but it's not just about disabled people, it's about anybody. Parents with buggies, they have problems using the trains. That if we could just get the train service really open to all, it would make a difference.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Carol. Shall we I'll go back to Paul and see if we can hear from some of our listeners.
Yes, please. Hey, thanks for these comments. It's a great idea, Johnny, to have a pause and get more comments. So yes, should we carry on now with the video, you think, from Jonathan?
Yeah, I can do that. Absolutely.
Why not? Let's get Jonathan's video in. So this is Jonathan Prasad. This is the video from the People's Powerhouse Racial Justice Group. And that gives Johnny, a busy man here, a chance to sift through all the other incoming questions, and also for everybody here to think about what your next input should be. So here's an important video from Jonathan Prasad.
Hello, my name is Jonathan Prasad. I'm the co-chair of the People's Powerhouse Racial Justice Network. The importance of green spaces for our mental and physical health has become clear over the past 18 months. During this period, we have seen disproportionate infection and fatality rates amongst people from BAME communities, with towns such as Burnley and Blackburn experiencing some of the highest national rates. BAME communities are more likely to live in urban settings and either not have access to or not make use of green spaces. One study suggested that if a green space took more than 10 minutes to walk to, people would not access them. Poorer communities tend to be located in areas of high deprivation, with poor housing stock and high rates of social problems, which only exacerbates the misery of living in a grey urban setting, as it increases stress levels, and they also tend to be polluted. A frequently cited reason for increased COVID infection rates is multi-generational household occupancy, which is common in some parts of the South Asian heritage community for both economic and cultural reasons. Having access to green spaces such as parks not only reduces the risk of infection, but is also essential to support emotional well-being and exercise as organisations. How can we fix this? I'll give you 3 suggestions. Firstly, support initiatives to create green spaces in deprived areas. By placing the lungs back in the city over the long term, we'll be able to reduce the burden of the healthcare system, especially in areas such as mental health. Secondly, introduce more green gyms which encourage people to access green spaces as destination spaces for health and well-being. And finally, ensure that green spaces are accessible to all. Target marketing to those that are least likely to use parks, both in terms of visual representation and also the language used. Organisations such as National Trust or Ramblers Association could also work to address some of those widely held beliefs about them, that they are middle class and essentially a white organisation. Thank you very much for your time.
Great stuff. Well, thanks for that, Jonathan. Sorry you couldn't join us in live, but very meaningful, thoughtful film. And it shows you, that it's worth making that recording for us. Thanks very much. So now how do we do this now, Johnny? It's audience, because I can feel the energy from the audience that leaping out of my little laptop here.
Well, if you want to hear more from the audience, we can absolutely do that before we go back to some of the listeners.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind, because they look great and I can feel it.
I've got a lot here. So let's go to Neil Denton. Do you want to come in?
Good morning, all. Really good to be here. Hi. I agree with so much of what I've heard. And I'd written before Steve talked that I'm seeing, yes, a big push from those who benefited most from the pre-COVID economy to return to that sense of normal. But I'm also seeing a big push from local government to reimagine public space and create a sense of better build back quickly. And that really concerns me, because I think what we're seeing there is that the conversations and the important dialogue is being skipped in order to get to a real sense of, oh, you know, let's create a new town centre, a new sense of being. I know in the city where I live, we're by young people who use our city centre probably most and know it most, and they haven't really been included or don't feel included in that conversation. And I worry that we're continuing to see relationships as the extra mile in this process when they should be the first mile. And if we're going to create that sense of equal and inclusive spaces that Emily was talking about, then we need to acknowledge that at the moment our conversations and our trust is unequally distributed across our communities. And that's going to take time, and it's going to take dialogue, and it's going to take a real sense of challenge, that if we're going to create those spaces where we all feel safe, then we also need to build that trust with each other to make those spaces feel safe as we can all use them. So just some thoughts.
Great, thank you so much, Neil. That's brilliant. And you happy for me to keep going, Paul?
Yes, please. Love it. Yeah. Thank you, Neil.
Great. So I have got Rowan Brown. Are you there?
Hi. Yes, I am.
Rowan,
Thank you.
Great to see you.
I think my internet must be really slow because I can't see anything, but as long as you can hear me. I was going to ask a question. Thank you for all of the very wise words spoken so far, particularly by the young people. Really blown away by Emily's comments in particular. So sorry for the discord, but my question doesn't relate to Emily's comments, but I just think they were really important. What I'm interested in, particularly as an industrial historian, is that one of the most sustainable things we can do is recycle our heritage environment. All of these empty buildings that we have all over the place and disused spaces. Obviously, as you can probably tell by the accent, I come from north of the border, but how can we assimilate that move to public ownership, which is happening in Scotland and other parts of Europe, to help get some of this built environment back into public hands so that it can be recycled for community good?
Thank you so much, Rowan. That's brilliant. And I'm going to go to Lisa now. Lisa Holden. Let's see if your microphone's working.
Can you hear me now?
Brilliant. Awesome.
Oh, great. No, to start off with, I was just posting links, but I was just taken up by David Stone's, probably far more eloquent to speak on, but the North Yorkshire LEP, which is circular economy, which is really quite interesting. And I never quite know who knows what. I always think everyone knows way more than me, but I suddenly thought that the charge of the Light Brigade, I always feel like some of the older people, we've sort of been chipping away at this for years and years and years. So I always feel like we have to be at the front so that we can keep the children at the back and protect them a little bit. And I think the video that I came across, the DVD 2040, with Damien, it's really good in an international level of showing how people, it doesn't really actually take a lot of money, and it can actually be done at a very grassroots level, just in your own backyard, consuming less. And I always feel like I always want to protect my daughter from the horrors of climate change. So I just feel like we should send the old farts like me out in front, and probably David can probably speak far more on what's actually happening in North Yorkshire. But I think on the back of the anti-fracking, because we stopped the fracking in Rydale, I think that it brought together a lot of people at quite a fundamental level. So I'm never quite sure, I know it happened in Manchester, I'm never quite sure how dissipated it is, but this event's brilliant at bringing people together, so I'll shut up now.
Thanks. Thank you, Lisa. That's great to hear from you. And I mean, you mentioned David Stone a few times, who can talk about North Yorkshire, so I'm going to go to David. If you're there, David?
Yeah, I am there. Yeah, I haven't gone out into the garden or anything. Well, thanks, Lisa. I was going to remain in listening mode today rather than talking mode. But yeah, I put a couple of things in the chat. One, I mean, I work for Coastal Vale Community Action, which is based in Scarborough on the Yorkshire coast, and we're a community development organisation. We try to help communities to thrive because we believe people and places matter, and we do that by listening primarily and working alongside people. So we noticed that the local enterprise partnership was doing a lot of stuff around the circular economy. This was a couple of years ago. We kind of got wind of it, and I have to say they've been really good at working with us and trying to work with the community to engage in what are some pretty hefty issues and some pretty hefty concepts and challenges. And it's a really interesting thing to be working on, because from our point of view, the challenge is to make some of this stuff relevant to people's everyday lives. And I have to say, as I've been talking about the work that we're doing on developing a circular economy in Scarborough, and also the work we'll be taking part in Great Big Green Week in September. And although that's been well received, it's not always well received, because it's quite often seen as something that isn't relevant to people's everyday stuff. You know, when you're worried about getting your bills paid, when you're worried about the challenge, the stuff that's going on in school, if you've got challenges with school, you know, people have other stuff to deal with, and climate change is just this massive worry in the background. So the key to what we're trying to do is to try, and this is the key to all our work really, is trying to give people an easy way into, you know, there are small things that people can do, and those small things then give them a sense of agency and a sense of power, and you can start to build on that. And also, I mean, luckily, being on the Yorkshire coast, we live in one of the most beautiful places. I haven't been everywhere in the world, but I would argue that it's one of the most beautiful places in the world. But that's maybe because I'm an adopted Yorkshireman and I boast about everything Yorkshire. But that actually gives people a local link. It makes it relevant. You know, if you see your beautiful beaches after a bank holiday and all the crap that's left behind by the day trippers, you know, that makes people angry. But if they get together and they tidy the beach up, that gives them a sense of, oh, we can do something together about this all. Yeah, and Erin from the LEP is here as well, but I'm not sure whether she's wants to say anything or not. But I'm going to shut up now. Thanks, Lisa, though.
Thank you, David. That was great. Thank you so much. Paul, would you like to hear for some more audience, or would you like to go back to the...
I was thinking back to the listeners now, because we've got so much great stuff from the audience. Thank you so much, and tons more coming. But this could be a good sort of pause, if it were, to go back to Clare and Beth and get their, you know, feelings and responses and comments on where we are at the moment. So what do you think? So anybody, Clare or Beth, over to you.
Happy to kick it off if you want, Paul. Yeah,
great.
Right, look, absolutely loads in that. Obviously, my specialism is the workplace and skills, the workplace. So I'm going to touch on skills and diversity in a minute, because we haven't touched on that, but it kind of links to some of the things the speakers were talking about. But I have to say, I was really impressed by Emily's contribution, because, you know, as a parent, you know, we protect our daughters from sexual harassment or harassment of any form as they grow, whether it's in school or, you know, green spaces, or, you know, as they move into the world of work. But actually those green spaces are the first, I found for my children, that first experience of independence, to be able to say, yes, you can go out, you know, go to the park, go here, go, and it all happens in green spaces, and they should be able to do that confidently without feeling like they're going to be harassed in any way. And that goes for our BME community as well. So everybody should have that. And I think for me, certainly when you move into the workplace and we receive a harassment of any form, then there are unions work tirelessly to negotiate policies and procedures in workplaces for that to be managed. So we have a zero tolerance to any kind of behaviour like that. in workplaces. So we have more power in that area. But I absolutely agree with you. When we are investing in these green spaces, we need to be thinking about safety, absolutely 100%. And to the small business owner who mentioned how she could get involved. Now, lots of local authorities have declared climate emergencies. I know Newcastle Council, Clare might talk about this a little bit more. I've got this fantastic initiative, how they're engaging with businesses on the subject. I won't talk about that in case she wants to come in on that. But in the Northeast, we do have a Northeast Climate Coalition. And at the moment, it's sort of a shadow steering group form. It's going to be officially launched soon. It's got a website. I'll share the link. If you're from the Northeast area, please, sign up to it, get involved in it. We need everybody, particularly the gap in the moment is colleagues from the Tees Valley engaging in it. So if we can kind of spread that, that will be brilliant. It's not quite as advanced as the Yorkshire and Humber model, but we're getting there. But I just want to talk about dead quickly is that, if we're going to move to net zero economy and introduce a wave of jobs, new green jobs, there's a massive upskilling and reskilling agenda that needs to happen before that. But one of the most pressing challenges in it, I see, is the lack of diversity in the energy sector, which is going to be required to fuel much of this stuff. So not enough progress has been made on increasing the number of women in the energy sector, especially in STEM roles, and the number of workers from BME backgrounds remains still chronically underrepresented. So there's a job of work for all of us to do, whether we're from LEPs or schools or local authorities, about bridging that gap between, emerging industries and young people, to let them know what their potential is so that they can have these opportunities. So when I've been taking part in citizens' juries, some of the great ideas they've come out with was things like green apprenticeship opportunities or Attenborough-style scholarships for young people so that can start thinking about their future careers. But we also need a skills system that, that is properly funded, that's going to take these young people into those jobs, but also taking on issues in these industries like equal pay, flexibility,